they were small and insignificant. This is why. So by the time Jesus' ministry is done, Paul had to ask a question. He asked the question in Romans 3, starting in verse 1. What advantage then is there in being a Jew? Or what value is there in circumcision? Before we read those next words, let me tell you, I am not Jewish. I was born with a pork chop in my hand. Crawfish boils are one of the favorite events in this church. I'm not Jewish. Having said that, I recognize that there's a special thing that God has done with this people group on the planet. And that there's a purpose behind it. A purpose that does not have an ocean between us and it. There's a purpose that shows up in your daily life. But for the sake of just finishing this scripture, the question was asked, what advantage is there in being a Jew? You know, if we asked 1,000 pastors in Texas, and Lord, there's probably 10,000 pastors in Texas. If you changed it so that it didn't sound so much like scripture, if you said something more along the lines of, is there any benefit in being of Hebrew descent? I wonder how many people would answer that question, much, in every way. I don't think that we understand the value of God having a distinct people group that could be picked out anywhere on the planet at any time solely because of the word He gave them. And one of the reasons we don't value it is because our own faith has become invisible. You can't tell who is a Christian in the room because religion has become a personal, private matter. So we have lost distinction between us and the world, and we see no value in an ethnic people being distinct from the world. In fact, we kind of just want everybody to be homogeneous and tolerate each other. This is not the call, this is not the radical call of the Bible. The Bible is a radical razor-like. By the way, in Hebrew, if you want to say razor, it's nazir. Razor-like cutting between two things. In fact, every covenant that was ever made involved the cutting. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. What value is there in being a Jew? Much in every way. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians 10.
There.
While the rest of you are turning to 1 Corinthians 10, I want to tell you that if you ever got a chance to read Romans 3, which I just read from in the original language, you would find some pretty colorful Greek words there. There's a phrase in Romans 3 that is me genito. Forgive my Texas accent. It's supposed to be Greek. It's the way that you translate a Hebrew phrase called hello. There is no way to translate it into a Bible because it would embarrass you. It would embarrass you because it's not the kind of language church people use. In fact, if it were June Cleaver in the 50s, maybe she would say, oh heavens no. But that's probably not how you would hear it on your job site. When confronted with the idea of, is there an advantage in being Jewish, Paul said 10 times in the book of Romans about the subject. Heaven forbid that they should pass away. Heaven forbid that sin should be allowed to reign. Heaven forbid, heaven forbid, heaven forbid. And what I found interesting when I circled all of those heaven forbids that show up in different ways in English, it always had to do with a misunderstanding of the nation of Israel. But we're in Texas, right? So what's it have to do with us? Are you in 1 Corinthians 10?
Yes. Yes.
For I do not want you to be ignorant. Is there anybody in here that would like to vote to be ignorant? I mean, aside from the way that some people cast their presidential politics vote, you know, whoever's cool, if you can play a saxophone on Arsenio Hall, then we must vote for you. Is there anybody that should fight for the right to be ignorant? No, of course not. In general, we prize education. There's not a biblical subject that people are more ignorant of than the customs given to Israel. We see it as unimportant. We put it into a Bible and then called it the Old Testament. Anybody here want to wear your old clothes, or do you want to wear your new clothes? Friends, it's not the Old Testament. It's the first of a series of binding promises. It's the first floor of a building. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea, They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they all drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Not that he was displeased with all of them, not pleased with most of them. Isn't it an interesting thing about our country? That some 80% of the people can say, I'm a Christian. Right? Especially if there's no definition, the number might go higher than 80% of the people. But when asked, 75% of the people don't think their neighbor is. Does this mean then that in any group of people that all as a mass claim something, that God might not be pleased with most of them because it's an insincere commitment? So the nation of Israel was really no different than our nation, huh? Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples. These things, whatever happened with the nation of Israel, occurred as an example for us. Hey, isn't it cool? Those of you, anybody in here got an older brother or sister?
Yes.
Yeah, raise your hand if you got an older brother. I'm looking. See, none of you thought you were Pentecostals, but I got your hands raised for the service was over. Right? Isn't it great when your older brother screwed something up? I mean, as a kid, like, you get to sit back and number one, the wrath is not on you. Number two, you got to learn, if I do that, this is what happens. I have friends that are brothers, and one of them was in a foreign country and got into lots of trouble while he was in a foreign country. Stole some Walkmans, did some things that missionaries' children shouldn't do. And I asked his other brother, hey, were you ever involved in that, the younger one? He said, when I saw the kind of beating that followed that practice, I thought it was not best for me. The nation of Israel has endured a massive beating. And it's been going on and on and on, in order that we might learn from their example. Their example was not only one of disobedience, it was one of obedience too. Just like your older brother didn't get everything wrong, they got some things right. If you ask my son Gabriel about my son Judah, Judah's the older brother in the scenario. Judah is everything to him. He knows the times that Judah gets in trouble. I mean, he might even smile a little bit about that. But in the end, it wasn't Daddy who taught Gabriel to ride a bike, it was Judah. Dad taught Judah, and Judah taught Gabriel. This is the way of things. Well, much of what we know about God, we learn from our older brother, Israel. And it's very much the same way. These things were examples. Turn with me to Deuteronomy 26. In Deuteronomy 26, starting with the 16th verse. The Lord your God commands you. It's funny, we don't even use that kind of language these days. We said the Lord asked you. Like, if you kind of like to be obedient, you know. We call him things like my personal Savior, as if he belongs to you. Kind of like my personal wristwatch, you know. Jews don't think of things in those terms. Something you can learn from your older brother is he's the Lord, our God. They embraced him as a community, realizing that none of them were independent from each other in their worship of him. They didn't view his commands as requests. They viewed them as commands, and they so honored them that even on their garments, they had things that symbolized each command. The Lord your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all of your heart and with all of your soul. You know, we're fond in the New Testament era of quoting, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul. We put it into a song, we'll throw strength in there too. But how do you know if someone is doing that? Well, the American says it's all inward. You can't really know what's in my heart. The Jewish heart says we know what is in your heart by what you're doing. You have declared that this day that the Lord is your God and that you will walk in his ways. Do you notice that they don't say things like you will believe his ways? They say things like you will walk in his ways. To the Jew, these terms are action-oriented. Our older brother is teaching us something. Christianity is not so much about believing something, is that belief showing up in the way that you live and move and breathe and act. That you will walk in his ways, that you will keep his decrees, commands, and laws, and that you will obey him. And the Lord has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession, as he promised, and that you are to keep all his commands. He has declared that he will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations he has made, and that you will be a holy people to the Lord your God, as he promised. In addition to the wonderful accolades that are bestowed upon this people, an older word that appears in a lot of the older translations is you will be a peculiar people, a distinct people. In other words, because they were actively seeking to live out what God had said, other nations would notice that. They would be different everywhere they went. Now, if we didn't preach anything else, if I never even got into the main text about the Nazirite and some visible things, I'm just curious. How many of you feel like your Christian walk is demonstrated to the extent that other people might ask you, dude, you're different, what's up with you? Because this is the way that it was in the first century. So, well, I'm a Christian because I don't drink. I don't smoke. By the way, neither of those are biblical imperatives. I don't wear those kind of clothes. I don't go to those places. Great. How are you different than the Church of the Latter-day Saints? How are you different than a Jehovah's Witness? What is it about your life that shows allegiance to Jesus? What is it that broadcasts to people, I am in love with Jesus? One of my favorite things, in practice, I've probably done it to everybody in this room. One of my favorite things to do when somebody says I'm a Christian, I say, great, when did you fall head over heels in love with Jesus? And it's funny that there's a visible recoil most of the time with that. Why? It's like saying I'm married. Great, tell me about when you fell in love with your wife. How would you feel if the people recoiled from that statement?
You would wonder about their happy marriage.
But we put these in two different categories, don't we? I mean, because our love for God is some kind of inward, invisible thing that nobody has the right to scrutinize. But our love for our wife is right out there in the public for everybody to see. You wear a band on your finger so everybody will know. Right? Wow, y'all got quiet, didn't you? It's an amazing thing. I didn't know this was one of those. Yes, we are one of those kind of churches. Turn with me to Esther 3. Esther, whatever you like to say.
There.
That's as much vote as you'll get in this church.
There.
This is the 3rd chapter of Esther. If you hit Job, you went too far. Hang a left. You don't need a job this morning. You need to read Esther. Actually, unfortunately, a growing percentage of us may need jobs. Y'all in Esther 3?
Yeah.
Esther 3, verse 8. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, history calls him Artaxerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. By the way, if we say a certain people, it's kind of like, what do you mean, you people? You know, those people. Well, who are those people? It depends on what people group you are. That's why we know that Haman is speaking to the king Xerxes. Who are those people? Well, somebody other than us people, right? Certain people. There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all of the provinces of your kingdom. Before we read that next line, if they're dispersed and scattered, how are they a certain people? I mean, dispersed and scattered, they should have mixed in. They should be unidentifiable as a certain people. Isn't it funny? Most stereotypes are based on dramatic, visible differences, like the color of our skin, the kind of hair we grow on our head or don't grow on our head, whatever it might be. They're usually something that is visibly distinct. But this certain people don't have a different skin color from the ones that are talking about. So how are they identifiable as a certain people? There's a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people. Their customs. Well, where did they get their customs? Were they really their customs? No, they were given by God Almighty. And he said, if you keep my commands, if you keep my ordinances, my decrees, then I will. And he promises he will do something for them. They were distinct wherever they went, sheerly by the fact that they were obedient to what God said. Well, good thing that was then and not now, right? Because you would never be distinct today by just doing what God told you to do, would you? Why do you think that we hold some men of God up as great men of God while we're just, have you ever heard the word nominal Christian? Really? There's such a thing? I thought we were all supposed to be supernatural sons of God. We have a way of electing our heroes. Those guys will be different. But we just want to blend in, you know. This is not the radical call of the Bible. You should stand out like a sore thumb everywhere that you are. And why should you stand out like a sore thumb? You know, I work with some pretty good people, you know. No, do you know? Because Jesus said he wouldn't entrust himself to people. He knew what was in them. Even when somebody called him good, he challenged it. So why do we throw that term around so often? Because we're all kind of good people, you know? No, I really don't know. My experience is that lost people and those in the church that have never really experienced gut-wrenching sacrifice will do whatever it takes to protect themselves. In the end, they'll murder you with their words. They'll steal from you. They'll slander you. They'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves. But everybody will call them good people because nobody can really know what's in our hearts. It was not that way throughout history, though. You know how you knew who the good people were? They were being fed to lions for their faith. They were blessing people instead of cursing them while they were nailed to Roman execution stakes. Throughout history, it has meant something to be one of his people. It's meant that men like Haman worked to persecute you. Did you know that the scripture says anyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted? How you stacking up with that one, my friend? Anyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Maybe we're not distinct enough. Maybe our ridiculous church programs have done little to shine the light of Jesus. Right? You can wear a Christian t-shirt and refrain from smoking cigarettes. That seems to be the church's big deal. Cigarettes. Wow. Great victory there, buddy. They ignore the fact that men like Charles Spurgeon smoked a pipe every day. They quote their sermons. They quote their sermons as if they were the gospel themselves and ignore the fact that they smoke and teach everybody else not to do it. What have we taken on? The great social issue of our time, drinking. Jesus drank every day of his life. By an American standard, that's alcoholism, even though he was never drunk, not one time ever, because that's sin. Why have we chosen these issues and left alone the more important issues? Like an outward visible love for your neighbor. An outward By the way, how many of you in here own a lawnmower? You can go ahead and raise your hand. Some of you are lying. How many of you own a lawnmower? Hands up. Wow. That's because you don't live near anyone else, right? I mean, Steve, you own a lawnmower. That's because there's not a house on your left or your right. There's not a house across the street. I mean, we all have to have our own lawnmower because God knows that loving our neighbor wouldn't mean that we might, 4 houses, share a lawnmower, right? See, it doesn't show up anywhere it's important. It just shows up in our church life. You really think that's what Jesus intended? And by the way, was he pointed out by the religious people of his day for his holiness? Was he pointed out because he didn't conform to their standards of holiness. Your guys don't wash their hands. Your guy hangs out with prostitutes. If you knew what kind of woman was touching him, all of those kind of statements, you know what? Jesus didn't mind at all. But the quote-unquote church people did. Interesting. These customs made Israel distinct from the other nations around them. I want to tell you some things that did. Incidentally, when I asked Cody, who took a Nazirite vow of a different kind, he's not Jewish, so he can't take a regular Nazirite vow. There is no temple or tent of meeting. He cannot meet those qualifications. But when he heard and read about a Nazirite vow, he wanted to do something. I got this list from him, and I'm just showing you how it applies to the Jewish people. They were visibly different. The Bible gave them a dress code. Told them they couldn't cut the hair on the sides of their face. They couldn't do lots of things, and other things they were commanded to do. This gave them an opportunity to explain to everyone who asked them about the Lord. They were distinct enough among the peoples of the world that no matter what nation they were sent into, everybody knew they were Jews. It gave them a sense of solidarity and centered their fellowship around the Lord. If you're different from everyone else, who do you have to fellowship with? Those who have the same ideals you did. It centered their fellowship around the right things. It taught them quickly and properly to discern people's motives. It caused them to grow intimately with the Lord. If everybody doesn't like you because you're different, you better get good at reading people pretty quick. It caused persecution because it was lived in an outward way instead of a private and inward way. Their level of distinctness through their customs could be used as a metaphor in their minds for their level of closeness to the Lord. It's funny, when I asked Cody about his experiences in shaving his head and avoiding TV and video games and alcohol and other things that young men are drawn to, he gave me that list, and all of them were true about Israel. Suddenly, his faith was not something that was inward and personal, something that everybody who went through the checkout line could see. Now it's funny, you can see a clerical color, can't you? But that's become part of the accepted norm. So it's not even weird anymore. It's just, I mean, to me it's weird, but to most people it's not weird. But you see somebody that does something outside of the norm as a love for the Lord, like not cutting their hair, not watching TV. All of a sudden it's interrupting everyone's lives. You don't know that there were times Cody stopped by my house and went, "Cody's here, turn off TVs." But it had a way of centering fellowship around the right things. I'm telling you, when you walk into a room, do people act differently because you were there? And is that different? A good way. Turn with me to number 6. Let's get into our text. Y'all bored already?
No.
There.
Numbers 6. When Miss Dee Dee began a struggle with cancer that she is winning and will continue to win, a bunch of the guys shaved their heads. I got more questions during that time period about my hairstyle than I had since I was a teenager and wrote words into my hair. Yeah. Sorry, Mom, Dad, I put you through that. And it gave me a chance to tell everyone who asked, does your life for Jesus proclaim itself in such a visible way that people ask you about it? Or is it a private, inward matter? Number 6. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of separation to the Lord as a Nazirite, he must abstain from wine and other fermented drink." Is there any question then that wine is fermented? and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink. He must not drink grape juice. I came from a camp that said grape juice and wine were the same thing. Do you think that Numbers just was not in that Bible? Huh. Wine or other fermented drink or grape juice. How about that? He must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. As long as he is a Nazirite, he must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. It's interesting that Samson was a Nazirite, but you saw him hanging around vineyards all of the time. Sometimes we like to see how close we can get to the things that we're not supposed to touch and see if it kills us. And if it doesn't, what happens? It emboldens you to keep going back and back and back until one day you wake up with your head in somebody's lap and you've got no eyes. If you don't understand that, you need to read the book of Judges. I want to tell you, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow. This idea of special vow is an interesting thing. If you're reading a different translation, it may say something different. King James puts no, it just says a vow of separation. A New American Standard puts a note that says, could be difficult. The vow could be difficult instead of special. Some translations are even saying extraordinary vow. This word in Hebrew is yapli, Y-A-P-L-I. But you won't find that in a Greek or Hebrew dictionary. And the reason that you won't is because when you conjugate verbs, for instance, if you conjugate the verb be, right? Not all of the tense, or rather am, any of them. Not all of the tenses look like the rest of the word. As you put various endings on them, they change, and sometimes it's even unrecognizable. In a Greek or Hebrew dictionary, this shows up as Paulal, P-A-L-A. And one of the things that is amazing about Paulal is that it is a verb, but it is used kind of like an adverb. Now, if this is going over your head, or you think, God, Eric, I don't want to go back to 7th grade grammar, I'll make it make sense for you. Usually, if we say somebody is running, and we want to describe it, we would say they're running fast or slow, right? In this case, it would be like saying, he's running runningly. This verb is used like an adverb. It's very strange. It shows up in an unusual sentence structure. And all of the sentence structure is aimed at doing something. If I told you he's running runningly, all of you would stop and go, wait, what? Like either I don't know what I'm talking about, or you didn't get what I was saying. This Hebrew sentence is constructed that way, and it's meant to point out something. Not just any ordinary vow. A vow that is some kind of extraordinary thing. Friends, don't you want to find out what the Lord considers extraordinary? What the Lord considers special? Are you mostly just living your life hoping not to get punished? Wow, isn't that a good question? What is your relationship with Jesus like? Is it mostly that you're just hoping not to get punished? Or is it that you're hoping to do something extraordinary for Him? Because I tell you, His Word has prophesied that there will be a separation between sheep and goats at His coming. And the difference is what they did or did not do in His name. Doesn't sound like He's looking for a group of people that simply hope not to be punished. One of the great ways to translate a word when you don't know it, and I'm no linguist, I don't qualify to criticize the NIV, but I can look and say, wow, these scholars, these amazing men that translated this word Paulal into special, how else have they used it? In other words, every other place they saw it, how did they translate it? Have you ever heard a word you didn't understand, but people gave you synonyms for it until you understood it? Let's do the same thing. I'm going to read these to you. This comes from Genesis 18. It's the 13th and 14th verse. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child? Now that I am old, is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. When discussing a 20-year-old promise of barren people having a child supernaturally, God said, is anything too hard? The word too hard is Paulal. Is anything Paulal for the Lord? Too extraordinary. too hard, too special for the Lord. In Exodus 34:10, we have it here. Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. When God was describing wonders, the likes of which the world had never seen, he said, I will do halal among you. The same word that is used to describe the type of vow is used to describe wonders that the world had never seen. Joshua 3:5. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Amazing is the same word, halal. Chronicles 16:9. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all of his wonderful acts. Wonderful is halal. Well, let's put some of those together. If anybody wants to make a vow, a difficult, wondrous, amazing, special vow, then I'm going to tell you how to do it. Does that add something to your understanding? Does that make that a little more vibrant? Because the people reading it, the people that he chose and communicated to in their own native language, that's how they would read it and understand it. They would read it not as just something that is hard or just something that is special, but that something that is hard and special in some kind of miraculous, extraordinary way. When we read number 6, we might just get a list of rules out of it. Don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. But what God was trying to communicate is if you would like to do something that is wonderful, amazing, and extraordinary, let me tell you the key principles and how to do it. Would y'all like to learn about that, or should we go home now?
No, I want to learn about it.
Okay, the right side of the room would like to learn about it.
We want to learn about it.
I just want you to know that in my years of speaking, I've learned the problems always come from the left side. Left coast, left side.
Our left. Our left.
I understand. It's a matter of perspective. This is not political science today, although I do hope you caught that. Okay, number 6. Let's get back to number 6. Thinking about this special vow. Some of the things that it involved here. When we look at the Paulal type things, let's pick up in verse 5. I think all of you got the no fermentation, no grapes, no raisins, those kind of things. Not even seeds or skins. Verse 5. During the entire period of his vow of separation, no razor may be used on his head. He must be holy until the period of his separation to the Lord is over. He must let his hair of his head grow long throughout the period of his separation to the Lord. He must not go near a dead body. Even if his own father or mother or brother or sister dies, he must not make himself ceremonially unclean on account of them, because the symbol of his separation to God is on his head. Throughout the period of his separation, he is consecrated to the Lord. How many times do you think he said separation? I got to tell you, one of the ways that the Lord knows whether you value him more than your own reputation, more than your own peers, more than the esteem of your friends, is, are you willing to be separate from them? The big fat answer in the church most of the time is no. Have you ever noticed our teenagers want to be sufficiently unique so as to be just like everyone else? Why are you wearing that weird black lipstick? Well, because I just want to express my individuality. And then you go and you see there's 10,000 kids that are wearing black lipstick, you know. Nobody truly wants to be unique because they want the esteem of their peers. Number one, if you're going to follow the Lord, it's going to cause some kind of separation in your life. Let's think about the kind of separation that this would be then. How about your religious life if you're a Jew? If you can't touch wine, how many cups of wine are there at the Passover meal? 4. Oh, sorry, no Passover. In fact, you can't find a religious feast in Israel that you would not be excluded from if you are a Nazarite. All of their religious life centered around these things. So only the unique kind of God we could serve would say, John, if you want to do something miraculous, wonderful, and amazing for me, stop serving me like they do. And by the way they do is not wrong. It's just going to be different for you. Boy, have you ever considered that Jesus might want something different of you than what the mainstream Christianity says? Or are you content just to get a bumper sticker? A USDA stamp says you're a Christian and you're done.
Wow.
Isn't that what our denominations have done for us? Giving you their USDA Christian stamp? I like what Charles Finney said. Men, I've examined your lives, and if you are the product of the seminary you intend for me to go to, I find you woefully short of the example of Christ, so I shall decline your offer. Wow, sounds like he didn't think religion was a private, personal matter. Funny how we esteem men after they're dead and hate them while they're living. How about that? How about a funeral? Right? During your period of separation, you cannot touch or go near a dead body. But my mom died, you know. My mom. Are you kidding me? I can't. The Lord wouldn't want me. Now, it sounds a little bit like a Jewish rabbi who once said, anyone who does not love me more than his father, mother, brother, or sisters is not worthy of me. The Lord was looking for a miraculous kind of separation. Is there something wrong with going to your mom's funeral? No, no more than drinking wine. And yet God wanted a separation period where it was just you and him. We got any single mamas in the room? Don't be ashamed. Anybody ever been a single mama? Now y'all are definitely lying. There's more than 2 single mamas in there. A special bond happens with your children during that time because it's just you and them. Right? Sometimes it's weird codependencies that shouldn't exist. But I'm speaking about the healthy kind here. Something happens when it's just you and one other. Covenant happens. Everywhere in our Christian walk, we should go through a time period where it's just us and the Lord. One of the problems with revivals is when this one gets bold enough and that one gets bold enough and they come to the altar and they fall at the altar. What happens to everybody behind them? 2/3 of the crowd comes and falls at the altar. It wasn't just them in the Lord. It was kind of a mass migration. You know, everybody's doing it. And so what happens is the ones that were saved on Sunday the next Friday are in the same back seats they were in the previous Friday. I'm not talking about backseat drivers. I'm talking about unholy living while people claim to be Christians because they've never been separated out as just them in the Lord and have to work out the details of their life. It's funny, for all of Americans' individualism, my Jesus, my salvation, my testimony, they never really experienced Jesus on an individual level. Because when you have a personal encounter with the King, he makes you part of his kingdom and it becomes communal. How can I help all the people of God? How can I care about my neighbor more than myself? This separation was something more than just abstaining. It was something about special devotion. Our God is not into a laundry list of don't do's. He's really not. He's into special devotion. How about verse 9? If someone dies suddenly in his presence, thus defiling the hair he has dedicated, he must shave his head on the day of his cleansing, the 7th day. Then on the 8th day he must bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons to the priest at the tent of meeting. The priest is to offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering to make atonement for him because he sinned by being in the presence of a dead body. Can you imagine that you could not be around a dead body or it defiled you? I mean, can you imagine something like that? Where would you go to church? I want you to get this. Nowhere in this writing have we even listed a time period, right? He didn't say your special devotion will be 7. It's going to say days, months, years. He doesn't. Your time period of special devotion to the Lord is up to you. But you need to understand something. He's going to hold you accountable for it. He will not release you from it. I'm just curious. That time when you prayed and asked him to be Lord of your life, or however that happened for you. For me, it was very non-religious. Changed me. Were you talking about a finite period of time? Or did you promise him your whole life? Because he's not going to hold anybody guiltless that makes a vow to him and does not keep it. Lord, I'm going to serve you as long as I need you, but if I ever get to a place in life where I don't think I need you, I'm not going to serve you anymore. At least that would be honest. I've got a relative that broke his leg in so many places it looked like he'd never walk again. It's amazing how he buddied up next to Jesus. Spent a couple of years in this church till he could walk again. Oh, bad man, bad man. No, no. Just an obvious example of what's going on in most people's hearts. When you need him, devoted to him. When you don't need him, less devoted to him. I mean, religion's a private matter, right? Who's here to judge my heart? There was a queen. Her name was Bernice. She's famous in history. Bernice took a 7-year vow. That's pretty impressive, right? 7 years. She's going to be like a Nazarite for 7 years. She was never a Jew, but in any case, Bernice took a 7-year vow. In the 6th year, and the 11th month, somebody dropped dead in her presence. Her 6th year and 11 months started again right then.
Wow.
So her vow got to be a 14-year vow. Wow. Do you think it was a vow people would take lightly then? Probably not, but we'll beg somebody to give their life to Jesus. Oh, come on, it's just the best thing for you. You don't want to go to hell, do you? Well, who wants to go? The devil doesn't want to go to hell. Does that make him saved? I mean, think about that. You couldn't even take a Nazarite vow among God's distinct people without considering the consequence. In church language, we call that counting the cost. I'm curious, did you count the cost when you got saved? He must dedicate himself to the Lord for the period of his separation. He must bring a year-old male lamb as a guilt offering. The previous days do not count because he became defiled during his separation. I don't want to run out of time preaching this because I've got some other beautiful things to show you. But I just got to tell you, how many of you got excited for Jesus, went out, been zealous for him, and then got tripped up in sin? Look, why do no hands go up? No, never. Wait, did you have? Oh, if y'all did, then yeah. I just want to make sure I wasn't the only perfect one in the room. There's a funny thing that happens in Christianity, even among serious, sold-out Christians. When they've done something for the Lord, they think like they've got this goodwill, right? Like this political capital, if you will. I mean, I sold my house and I went across the seas for Jesus, and when compared with you, it's pretty good. Every time you break your vow, your previous days do not count. So the only way that'd be a giant feather in your cap is if you didn't sin between doing that and now. How you doing with that one, Saints? Yeah, me not so good either. It pretty well puts me in a position to be at his mercy every day. Because the previous days do not count. Now, if you heard that and said, oh, that means nothing I do for the Lord is good enough. You didn't hear the other side of they do not count. If the previous days do not count, the same day that you sinned, it doesn't count either. You get a fresh start again. Amen. You might even call this a pre-Christ, born-again statement. If the previous days don't count to your benefit, they also don't count to your detriment. Now, friends, is that not good news? Yeah. That's good news from where I stand. And what do we call the good news?
Gospel.
The gospel. Mm-hmm. How about this? Go with me then to verse 13.
There.
Now this is the law of the Nazarite. When the period of his separation is over, he is to be brought to the entrance to the tent of meeting. Where do we want this thing to occur? Because religion is a private matter. Do it in the broom closet of your house.
Nope.
That's not what he said. Because religion is a private matter. Let this be between you and God, and it's nobody's business but yours. Oh, honey, I hope nobody made you feel bad about your salvation. When did Christianity become such a mamby-pamby kind of thing? I mean, the original people died for their faith. And really, I want every head bowed, every eye closed, lift an eyelash. and you're saved. Let's get real. These guys, for their extraordinary, miraculous separation to the Lord, went to the tent of meeting. Anybody in your best Hebraic roots understanding want to figure out why they called it the tent of meeting? Because they met there. Your commitment to the Lord needed to be public before everyone. That's why John went baptizing at the Jordan and didn't go baptizing in somebody's bathtub. You know? I don't care whether you sprinkle or don't. It makes no difference to me. I just want to see it. Well, you know, the Lord really kind of baptized me because it was raining that one day. Well, the Lord really kind of baptized me because I was thinking about Him when I went swimming with everyone.
What?
That's about how public people's commitment to the Lord is. You know what we tell our young people when they want to be baptized? Invite your class. They don't have to come, but if you want to invite your peers, your class, we will not baptize you. If they're very young, too young to be in a class, but old enough to be asking about baptism, we have the Barbie doll tool. If you won't give up your Barbie, you're not ready to be baptized. Because we want them to understand this is a lifelong commitment. In India, they don't have a Barbie doll test to pass. You have to buy food for the congregation on the day you're baptized. It means men save for years for the honor of being baptized publicly. Yeah. What do? We beg people to be baptized so we can report to our denominational headquarters that we're doing well. Another devil baptized today, Lord. Another devil baptized. No lives changed, no sincere, miraculous, amazing commitments to the Lord, just another dry center that became a wet center. I grew up in a church that boasted more baptisms every year than they had attendance in the church. What does that tell you? It's funny, their title had everything to do with baptism. Now this is the law for the Nazarite. When the period of his separation is over, he is to be brought to the entrance to the tent of meeting. There he is to present his offerings to the Lord. A year-old male lamb without defect for a burnt offering. A year-old ewe lamb without defect for a sin offering. A ram without defect for a fellowship offering, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and a basket of bread made without yeast, cakes made of fine flour mixed with oil, and wafers spread with oil. So you need to go to the most public place in all of Israel to make this vow. You need to stand at the entrance to the tent of meetings. And then the cost of these offerings. When you hear cow or ram, more accurately, what does that mean to you? For Adam, it means the truck that you take great pride in. Well, what does it mean to you? Not much, right? I mean, it's just a ram. How many of you own livestock in here? Okay, one person owns some livestock in this room. If we were speaking to ancient Israelites, every person would own livestock. And when you thought about a goat, you didn't just think about what you could sell it for at the local stockyard. You thought about the fact that it produced milk, that it produced cheese. And maybe best of all, what did 2 goats produce? More goats. Now this may not mean much to you, but since you're Americans, we'll talk to you in American terms. Most people that have estimated this cost in today's dollars would say when you look at the loss of life, when you look at the loss of produce from that life, when you look at the loss of future earnings from them, we're talking about a sacrifice that would approach $200,000 in today's terms. How many of you got $200,000 laying around? Please don't raise your hands. You'll get phone calls from the needy people. Is that a big number? It is, isn't it? Did God just want rich people to do this? No. But He did want you to have to reach out to the people around you and say, I can't do this alone. I want to do something so amazing for the Lord. I want to do something so special for Him that it'll change every area of my life. Here's what I have. Can any of you help me? Because this was a way to spread the covenant. It was a way for people to join in the work. By the way, you know what else it was? Serious accountability. Let's suppose that we had to put up 200 grand for Cody. And then 30 days into his vow, you walked into his house and he's popping grapes like they were, popcorn. How would you feel about that? Doesn't sound like religion is a private matter, huh? Sounds like it was a community investment. As for me and my household, join with you and your household. As for the community of God, we will serve the Lord. Stand before the temple with the foreign armies coming, but we will stand with our God. Is that how you think of your faith in Jesus? I found these order of offerings just an amazing thing. Look at verse 16. The priest is to present them before the Lord and to make the sin offering and the burnt offering. He is to present a basket of unleavened bread and is to sacrifice a ram as a fellowship offering together with its grain offering and drink offering. Then, at the entrance to the tent of meeting, the Nazirite must shave off the hair that he dedicated. Look at the order. You must make provision for your sin. Something has to die for you. Then you must make provision so that you can be brought into fellowship with the Lord. Also, something had to die and something had to grow out of the ground. How about that? Die and grow out of the ground. Almost like resurrection. And then after your sin had been atoned for and a way had been made for you to fellowship, what was your job? To bring something dedicated to the Lord. Do you really think God wanted people's hair? I mean, if he did, the hippies were on to something. I think he wanted a symbol of people's dedication. I think he wanted some outward sign that was invisible. Cody, Cassidy, why don't y'all go ahead and set up here. Look at verse 18 with me. Then at the entrance to the tent of meeting, the Nazirite must shave off the hair that he dedicated. He is to take the hair and put it in the fire that is under the sacrifice of the fellowship offering. When you're thinking about that, some of you have been here when I've done this before. We will not burn hair here today. But let me ask you, is that a memorable smell?
Yes.
How many of you remember the last time I burned hair? Okay. That's a good portion of you. And the ones that don't remember it probably weren't here. Praise God for church growth. God calls it a pleasing aroma. To me, it was kind of a stench. But I want to ask you something. Let's imagine that me and Judah, come here. Me and Judah are walking to the temple, right? What are you hearing? You've all seen black sheets unrolled. It's okay. We're walking to the temple, me and Judah, right? What do you talk about with your son when you're walking? Tell the truth. You see that deer I shot last week? It was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, he had more horns than any deer you ever seen. No, that's not your thing? Did you hear that bass I caught, man? You never catch a bass like that, man. I caught bigger bass than you've seen on TV. What do you talk to your kids about? Because the Jew is supposed to be talking to his son about God's word when he walks along the road, when he lies down, when he gets up. So Judah and I are Jewish. We're walking along. You know? We're walking along. We're talking about God's word, and what's that? What's that? Oh, son, that's something that's extraordinary. It's miraculous. Yeah, Dad, I know it smells like it. Huh? You don't understand. To God, that's pleasing because it's an aroma nobody will ever forget. Come on, I want to show you something. I want you to see something. You see that Sasquatch up there? So it became a public event in the town square. Said, did you see that right there? Now let me ask you, if I explain to Judah, this is an extraordinary vow, a supernatural vow, a time of devotion to the Lord. You got any little inquisitive kids like mine? What do they turn to you and say? Then why don't you do it, Dad? What an amazing thing. When men live a certain way, it causes others to go, why am I not living in that way? So we do one of two things. We go the Haman route. There's a people group on this planet that are different than everybody else. We need to exterminate them. Or you go the Jesus route. I will show you how to walk as I walk and be pleasing to my Father. It's for everybody. Those who are near, those who are far off, everybody. As many as who are called on the name of the Lord. You can all be part of this supernatural vow. Can you see how that could be a teaching tool?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe God wanted us to know. Cash, you can begin. Now, you've all seen haircuts before. But in Israel, this would be a special thing. Now, I want to tell you, as we're doing this, the haircut was not the only part. There was a sacrifice. How many of you can see verse 19? After the Nazarite has shaved the hair of his dedication, the priest is to place his hands. How many hands? Well, if he's got more than two, we're in trouble. The priest is to place his hands, in his hands, a boiled shoulder of the ram, and a cake, and a wafer from the basket, both made without yeast. The priest shall then wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He has in one hand the sin offering. You know what he has in the other hand? The fellowship offering. Now I'm just curious, if you wanted to wave two distinct things before the Lord and show everybody that you were complying, that they were in your hands, would you do it like this? Can everybody see exactly what I've got here?
Yeah.
Yeah? What's behind the silver bottle? No, so you probably would have a sin offering in one hand and a fellowship offering in the other hand, and you would stand at the tent of meeting while this is going on, and the form of a cross. And he would say, if there's going to be a special supernatural vow, if there's going to be something like the world has never seen before, this is what it would look like. A period of sincere devotion to the Lord. Now you remember that the time period was of their choosing? It would have been 3.5 years. Jesus was not a Nazarite. How do you know Jesus was not a Nazarite? I'll tell you my favorite one. He drank wine. How else do you know he was not a Nazarite? He touched dead bodies. My life was one of them. This means then that the Nazarite vow, the special, miraculous vow, was not necessarily about these details, but in its heart, about doing something unique and amazing for the Lord. Something that separates you. Something that involves you abstaining from fleshly desires to be free for spiritual desires. Something that shows everyone that you're consecrated before the living God. There's this neat little phrase that occurs in number 6. It's in the last verse. It's the 21st verse. This is the law of the Nazarite who vows his offering to the Lord in accordance with his separation, in addition to whatever else he can afford. The $200,000 that you had to get your friends together to raise, not enough. The animals that had to die, not enough. The separation itself, not enough. What did he really want from you?
You.
Everything. Let me ask you, is your walk with the Lord a whatever else you can afford type walk? Are you only looking for your minimum and then out? How many of you call the box in the back of the room the tithe box? God never wanted a tenth. He wants your entire life. A tenth was just a good place to start. So I knew if we were in church long enough, we'd get to talking about money. That's right, we have to talk about where your idols are. Anybody that is foolish enough to think this church exists to get rich is more deluded than just by sin. God is looking for your life. And he stood in a very public place making a very public sacrifice to get your life. Isn't it interesting that this kind of Christianity is weird? Isn't this weird? Hold on, stop for a second. Turn sideways, Cody. Isn't this weird? You can tell me the truth. Is it weird?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's weird. Christianity is supposed to be weird. Maybe we need a little more weird. If the only thing that we're doing is trying to be unique in a way that is sufficiently like everyone else to avoid being detected, it's not unique. It's not special. It's not miraculous. You know, the first time somebody put on one of those ridiculous Pope hats, it may have been kind of a neat distinction. He's different. Everywhere he goes, this man is set apart. Now it doesn't mean that. Now it's more like a worldwide monarchy of some kind. The first time a Christian ever wore an ichthus on their chest might have been neat. Might have been a way of distinction. But as soon as everybody did it, it loses something, doesn't it? I'm curious. Are you looking for the whatever else you can afford? Are you looking for a new way to do something for Jesus, something miraculous? What would your Nazirite vow look like? You know my favorite part of Cody's Nazirite vow? Anybody want to guess? He was the only one who did it. That was my favorite part. Some of you don't know this story, but Cody is an adopted son to me. He didn't do this the day after I preached about Nazirite, and he didn't do it because 20 other people did it. He did it because a year after I preached about the Nazirite, he had counted the cost and contemplated it, and he wanted something to cause his spiritual life to grow. Those of you that know Cody and know that this religion is not private, inward matter, can you testify that his life has grown?
Yeah.
Maybe as much as anybody I've ever known. Is it because God wanted his long hair? No. He wanted him to have to go to work and be persecuted for his faith. He wanted people to think that he was weird and ask him questions wherever he went. He wanted him to have to live in a way that represented the King of Kings. I asked Cody, what did you gain from this walk? He said, well, when I became visibly different from everybody, it gave me an opportunity everywhere I went because people asked me, dude, why don't you get a haircut? Or when he got this haircut, hey man, what's up? Why'd you shave your head? You know, you got cancer or something? That's what people say. How well prepared were they for the answer of, no, I just really love the Lord and I wanted to do something special? They may never have seen that before. Why? Why have they never seen that before? The answer is sitting in your seats. Isn't your life every day supposed to be something special before the Lord that the people have never seen before? Is that your aim? I know a man that was walking in a nuclear plant said, I don't want to be a Christian, Lord. They're all a bunch of flakes. The Lord spoke to him and said, why don't you be a real one? Come on. Do you not hear the voice of the Spirit telling you anything this morning? I don't want you to grow your hair out or shave your hair off, but I want your faith to be just as obvious. I asked him about the last 88 days of his vow. In the last 88 days, there was no TV. There were no video games. There were no movies of any kind. He said, Pastor, those 88 days centered my life in the right kind of fellowship. I was no longer talking about last night's football game. I was no longer discussing what's coming on TV the next day. And when I walked into a room, TVs went off and Bibles opened. He said, do you know what that did for me? I said, what did it do, Cody? He said, it increased my discernment. When I began to care about the things the Lord cared about, when people came through my checkout line at Kroger's, I could see things in their life I'd never seen before. I knew this one was a witch. I knew that one had been molested by their father. I knew that one had a need in this area. I wonder what would happen if we were a little less distracted and a little more focused on the supernatural aspects of our faith. Maybe you wouldn't have to go on a witnessing campaign. Maybe it would just be part of your life. I said, Cody, is there anything else that you would like to share? He said, as persecution began to increase in my life, not making the money that I thought I could make, being passed over for jobs that I should get. He said, I began to know something of the fellowship of the sufferings of Jesus. Now, it's a small thing, but I began to be acquainted with what it was like to be an outcast for no other reason than you wanted to do something special for your God. Come on now, is that not preaching to anybody yet? So Cody, if you have one other thing to say, we're going to give Cody a chance to speak here real soon. What would it be? He said it was never about the hair growth. The hair growth became a metaphor for my spiritual growth. Isn't that an interesting, beautiful, miraculous, wonderful, and amazing thing? You remember the question I said my little boy would ask me if we were in ancient Israel walking with the temple and we heard a story like that? Does anybody remember? Then why haven't you done it? What does your Nazirite vow look like? Is your life just about fitting in? Or is it about something more than that? What a good question. Anybody want to guess what Cody's biggest concern is at the moment? It's not that Cass is going to cut him with that razor. When his distinction for the Lord became such an outward thing, when it became such a physical thing, when it became the kind of thing that people noticed without him having to speak, what started as restriction had turned into freedom for the Lord. And now he told me with tears in his eyes that he was worried about losing that. If my hair is not the conversation piece, if my abstinence from certain things is not the conversation piece, will I be less distinctive for the Lord? Friends, that answer is also sitting in your seats. Is it possible to not grow your hair long, but be so devoted to the Lord that people see it? Is it possible to have such an amazing faith in the Lord that it's contagious and everybody else figures that out? It should be. This should not be about a young man's hair or lack of hair. Ultimately, it's about his heart. Yeah. Could we learn anything from that, you think? Steve, why don't you grab Matthew? We'll worship here in just a minute. This is really an amazing sermon example, isn't it? Anybody know how long this vow was? It's 370 days. You know why it was not 365 days? Because he wanted to share it with you. Doesn't that express the heart of a Nazirite vow? Where's your heart? We're going to take communion. Not as a church. We're going to commune with the Lord and our brother as he takes communion, as soon as he's done being shaved. Till then, I thought we might worship and consider what a Nazirite vow in our lives would look like. Because you're going to walk away from this with a couple possible outcomes. The first is, boy, those people are weird. The second might be, for him, that was a really cool thing. But the third and most important needs to be, what does that mean for us? Should it really be up to the 19-year-old kid, now 20, to set the example for everyone? Should it be? Probably not. Huh? Was it Timothy's job to set the example for Paul? So where are you at? God sent me an adopted son who set an example for us. You're going to let it stay that way? I've watched Cody be slandered. Literal lies told about him for no other reason than his vow. A lady called our house and said, there's some weird guy sitting outside your house, and he's parked in such a way that I don't think he wants y'all to see. He looks like a crazy person. And I just want you to know he's out there. To which our response was, we know. That's our son. Y'all stand to your feet. Let's worship a little. Have you been slowly counting the cost of the Nazarite vow in your mind? I want to read to you something written in ancient Jewish literature. Faithfully preserved for us by the Jewish nation. An apostle who was Jewish when he was born and Jewish when he died wrote to a group of people who were Jewish and also Gentiles. And he said, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood." What had once only been spoken about as distinct among the nations as a particular ethnic group was now being applied to everybody who would follow Jesus. A people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into the wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Friends, what did the Jewish nation teach us? We need to be so distinct wherever we're scattered that everybody knows us for no other reasons than God's word is in us. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such godly lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. I think you can see it was not just a commission given to Cody. It's everybody who claims to be the people of God. Let's worship and think about that. I'm going to grab the communion elements so that we can watch Cody take communion. I'll take communion here in just a minute. Then we'll finish shaving after everybody's gone. Those of you that think it's kind of strange because it's an Older Testament practice might be interested to know that in Acts 18, Paul shaved his head because of a vow. It's only one vow mentioned in all of the Bible where men shave their heads. In Acts 21, come here, Cody. In Acts 21, Paul was being accused. You teach men everywhere to depart from the customs Moses gave us. But so that they would know there was no truth in these rumors about him, Paul paid the expenses of 4 men who took vows and shaved their heads. What does that tell you? It's 4 times the cost. It doesn't say he shaved his head, but it does say he participated with him. You might think about that. They went and recorded in the temple the date that it would start and the date that it would end. By the way, where do you think Paul would have gotten that kind of money? Must have been that the Gentiles wanted to support Israel's right to remain distinct among God's people, because they understood inherently that religion was not a private matter. Wow, I wonder if we can learn from that. You want to take communion? Yeah. Come on. Break that man. Our King, on the night he was betrayed, held up bread. He said, "This is my body broken for you." When we take communion, friends, it's not just commemorating what he did. It's a pledge that you will do what he did. That's our pledge. body was unleavened, it was pure. But the thing most of us notice is the blood. Universally, it's red or deep purple. And you know if it's leaking out of your body, it's precious. You fight to hold it all in. But he held his up as a cup for us. He said, I'm not confirming with you a wedding, because they held up cups for that. I'm not confirming with you just Passover, because they held up cups for that. So I'm making a new covenant with you in my own blood. This was a covenant that we would be special, wondrous, amazingly set apart for him, even if it cost our blood as it cost his. I think Cody's earned the right to share a few words with you.
Boy, as I stand here 370 days ago, a completely different person today. I guess if I had to tell anything from what I've learned, it's if you're going to do it all the way.
Yeah.
If you're going to go for it, then go for it where people see a difference. Because if you don't, you're going to be just mistaken for the crowd. One thing that I know is I know that I'm different today than I was 370 days ago. I can promise you, if I look in the mirror, I'm not going to recognize myself. I'm going to break it. But this shouldn't just be, it's not just an outward appearance that I don't recognize myself from a year ago, 370 days ago. And that, I mean, if you're really looking and look what your last year ago, last month ago, if you're not completely enthralled or don't even recognize yourself, then I would say that there's a room for improvement. That if you're not making the special vow for Jesus, and if you're not, don't make a commitment, and you're not making it as serious as maybe say this one or such an outward, then maybe you pray that maybe it hasn't been to the fullest extent that God's had for us. And
Let's do this then, church. Cody and I are going to pray. You get one more song and then you're dismissed. We're actually going to go burn hair again. Ask yourself one question. What do I need to do for my faith to be more visible and less invisible? Please don't put that question off. Please don't leave here and just forget about it and have seen a little kid get his head shaved. Ask the question, what do I need to do for my faith to be more visible? And then I want to ask you, is there anything you need to separate yourself from? Is there anything you need to abstain from? Is there any area you need to reconsecrate your head in? Is there anything else that falls in the whatever else belongs to the Lord category that you need to give to Him? And then respond. There'll be no altar call. We did that for 3 hours last Sunday. And we're that kind of church. But the King of the universe is watching to see that you make good on your vow.